Welcome to Unlocked. I am Dr. Joel Swakowski, and in this show, we explore how truth comes to life through real stories and real people. This episode, I am joined by Dani Lewis, a friend of mine from church. I've known her for a few years now, maybe a little more than that, uh, but she is one of a kind for sure. She has an incredible story. She has incredible energy and incredible insight. So I'm really excited for you to hear her story in this episode. I do want to give a small trigger warning. There is sensitive subject matter in this episode. There's discussions over addiction and medication. There's discussions over abuse and multiple variations. But I also want to give an encouragement warning because she has a great story, and be prepared to be inspired. So I'm excited for you to hear this story. Let's dive in. Hello, Dani. Thank you for coming on my show. How are you doing tonight?
I am doing great. I don't want to
Yeah.
scream into the microphone and hurt people's ears, but I'm
Oh, I'm
doing
so
good.
excited. Yeah, I'm great. I'm so grateful for you to be here, and you've been very open about, being a fan of the show and having seen every episode and all that. So it's about time I have you on because I know you have a great story and I want people to hear it. And I want them to hear it from you because you have such an infectious demeanor about you. So with all that said, we met in church a few years ago, but I don't really know where you grew up. How about we just start from there?
Yeah. Yes. So I was born in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Um, it's near Detroit. It's about an hour from Detroit. I was born to Paul and Kathy, my two parents. I am in the middle. I have two older sisters and two younger brothers. Growing up, uh, I don't really have like a lot of recollection of my parents arguing or fighting, but apparently there was quite a bit of argument. And so at an early age, I was about 6 years old. My parents did divorce, and that was kind of like, I think, like for me, the big first thing I remember in my life feeling
Mm,
very traumatic. Um,
yeah.
and not understanding a lot of why they were separating. And I think as a kid too, sometimes our recollection of things, even though they said they were fighting, sometimes when you're a kid you can kind of block that stuff out, and then you're like, why are you getting divorced?
Yeah.
um yeah, so that was like the first recollection I have of just really starting to become aware of how much I felt, how many feelings I have, and becoming
Thank
aware
you.
of the fact that I may be a little bit of a extra sensitive human being.
All right.
Um, Later I came to find out my gifts, which helped explain so much of my life, my past life. But yeah, so growing up, I became very aware that I had a lot of feelings. There were multiple times growing up where I would become destructive, get into trouble at school, get into trouble with my brothers. There was one time where my brothers and I like broke into an abandoned house and like literally taking baths and just yeah. So I think I was feeling a lot, and didn't always have a healthy way to get out what I would be feeling. And I also became very aware of the fact that when I was around other people, I would feel their feelings as well. And so, from a very early age on, I would have my feelings, but I was always hyper aware of everybody else's feelings around me. Um, you know, and when you grow up, your parents often didn't get tools on how to deal with
Right.
different things. So it's like you're dealing with your parents and your parents' parents' parents, and all of the things that just get passed on from generation to generation. So, um, yeah, I remember a lot of times also growing up, sitting underneath trees and talking to God. We didn't grow up super religious. There wasn't a lot of church in our house. We didn't go to church or really talk about those things much. My dad grew up Catholic and my mom grew up Lutheran. Um, I do have some really great memories of going to church with both of my parents' mothers. So on either side, going to the Lutheran church with my grandma on my mom's side, and going to the Catholic church with my dad's mom. So yeah, so I found that when I could get quiet and by myself, I would experience a little bit of peace and calm. Um, but
So
then,
then,
oh
you
yeah,
mind if I interject here? So
yeah.
what was that your what was that journey for you of like how young were you at this time when you're starting to talk to God?
Probably 7, 8. Yeah,
So
pretty
was
young.
it like was it your grandmas who kind of like influenced you to know there's a God, to believe in God, and like that just what was that? Just seems like something that must have just come like that belief just came natural to you.
I think somehow, yes.
Yeah.
Uh, I always felt it. I always felt connected to nature and
Okay.
feeling like that is there for a reason.
Oh,
But also, I remember I have a lot of memory of doing the rosary with my grandma. She would sit in this chair every night, and she was very diligent about this. And I would sit in her lap and she would hold the beads and I would hold them with her. And so I still have all those, I still have the rosary memorized from doing that with her. Um, but yeah, and then also with my other grandma, seeing her do like acts of service, like it just kind of, I think, implanted some things in me that carried out later in life on the other side, having that experience, like watching my grandma go to people's homes that didn't have food, and she'd just bring, loads of groceries,
wow.
and she'd just treat them like anybody else and wasn't shaming them or anything. She'd come to their house and bring the groceries right in and play with the kids and talk to them for a while. So I feel like on both sides I got some good experiences and some good influences with that. So
Well, that's
yeah.
great.
Yeah.
7 years old. All right. Well, then, yeah. What happened from there? You're hanging out under trees, hanging, enjoying nature, talking to God. That's great.
um yeah, so then my dad remarried, and so I gained a stepbrother. And then a few years later, my mom remarried and I gained a stepsister. So the dynamics changed again. And I think, when you're in two separate households and you have separate, at one house it's this way and at this house it's this way. So there were oftentimes I just was feeling a lot of that. Um,
Yeah.
and then there was also, growing up, a neighbor, there was some, abuse there. I Years later, I shared that, but for a long time, no one knew. I felt some shame, like I may have done something to cause that. So I was about 8.5, actually, when I had my first drink of alcohol. It was up north, with my stepbrother, and we were playing bar behind the bar. In Wisconsin, it's a thing to, have a evening cocktail, and it's not unusual. And so I know my parents had no idea that we were doing that, but I have a distinct memory of drinking that straight vodka, and even though it burned and it felt really gross, uh, just remember feeling that warm feeling come over my body, and for just a minute not being able to feel anything. And it's like, so this is what it's like to not feel anything and to just get like a break from all of this intensity that I would experience, and not really having a way or knowing how to handle that or deal with that again. So what started at 8 years old as that escape slowly over time progressed into alcoholism for me and addiction. So, it started at 8 with just, you know, behind the bar, sneaking a few
A
drinks
game.
to yeah. Yeah.
It's simple. Like that's like no different than like in up
Right.
north in Wisconsin. That's like kids playing house or doctor. It's just like just pretty normal, right? Pretty
Really
innocent.
short.
It's
Yeah.
interesting though. So did you know at that early age that and you clearly knew you felt thing. We like to call it like you have big feels, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you know you felt things stronger than most people? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I was pretty aware that I was different than other kids. On the playground, people would have their friends, and I made friends very easily, but I would often choose to play with the two imaginary friends that I had. You know,
Yeah.
people would be looking at me on the playground. I'm talking to them, and you know, I have names for them and storylines for these imaginary friends. So, yeah, I think I was pretty aware that I didn't always fit in, which now it's okay. So,
Yeah, but I mean that all paints a even clearer picture as to why just that like I don't even want to necessarily call it peace you felt at eight and a half, but like quiet
mm,
or
yeah,
stillness maybe,
yeah, yeah,
because there's a lot going on with everything you're feeling. And not having the tools to know how to channel it the right way or process it or
right.
put words to it.
Put words to
So
it.
it and what's interesting, and you know more about this stuff than I do, like with alcoholism, alcohol is never the problem, right?
Never. No,
It's
no.
a coping mechanism for something deeper. So
Yeah.
it makes sense as to why. I mean, I think it's really healthy. You've been able to kind of pinpoint where this all started and not just where, but why.
Mhm. Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah. Yeah, so what started as just that, few couple of pulls off that, oh, no one's looking, but even like looking back, it's like the secretiveness started at such an early age too. Um, and somehow I think knowing somewhere inside of me that what I was doing was not right because at that early age, I already felt like I had to keep it a secret and be secretive about it and get away with it, you know. And then by the age of, I think, 12 or 13, I was, hanging out with older kids at school and smoking cigarettes. And then, not really drinking on the weekends, but always finding that way to sneak behind knowing where my parents kept their liquor and sneaking it that way. And I don't think they really had any clue I was doing that at all.
Especially at what age is it? This is still like middle school, high school ages.
Yeah. Yeah.
So part of it is, also maybe just the, you know, ignorant, like I would never assume that, my
Right.
my daughter who's, 13 is in the beginning stages of building a
Mhm.
habit. And
Yeah.
but that's how these things work too. I imagine, the more of these experiences you have, the more you need in order to get that warmth,
Oh
right?
yeah. Yeah. Yes,
Yeah.
that's definitely how it progresses. But yeah, and then by 14, I was definitely having a lot of depression. At 14, I had my first suicide attempt, and really, really having a lot of trouble in school. Um, my parents, I know, were doing everything they could to try to get me help. They took me to psychiatrists, to counselors. So I was also medicated at a very early age and began to get diagnosed with things like ADD, ADHD, manic depressive. And so, yeah, I think by the time I was like 16 or 17, I had had a few stints in the hospital, 72-hour holds. Um, yeah, it was, yeah, and then you get medicated on top of that. And again, I know that my parents were just doing, they didn't know what else to do. And, you go to seek help, and that's what you're told is going to help them. So that's what you do. They those were the options. It's like,
Right.
either she ends up not living through one of these times, or she completely loses her mind and we don't know what to do, or she won't graduate high school, or I mean, yeah, I really feel for my parents looking back at how hard that must have been for them, not knowing how to help me, but knowing that there was definitely signs and symptoms and effects starting to happen from causes they didn't know. So yeah, it can snowball pretty fast. So
Yeah. Oh, so this is high school years. You're already starting to see, well, you've been through a lot at this point already.
yeah, yeah,
Things
yeah.
have happened to you that definitely shouldn't have, things that were unfair, and then you're also not coping with all this stuff in a healthy way.
Mhm.
But just that, I would say a lot of the mercy you're giving your parents and doing the best they could with
Oh God,
the
yeah.
resources available. You also didn't have the tools to know how to cope with this stuff. So,
No.
unfortunately, you chose a path that was unhealthy, but I understand it.
Yeah, yeah.
So then what?
Yeah. So, that pattern continued for many years, and it just kept getting progressively worse. Eventually the alcohol wasn't cutting it, so it became pills, and then, street drugs when you couldn't get the pills. Um, and then, I would have a stent in a hospital for, sometimes more than a few nights, um, much longer and heavily medicated, and just a lot of labels um, put on you that and to my to my being wrong. Looking back, I was looking for any way to control things as well. And I was so secretive. So there were so many times where I would get medication and then I would be drinking or doing drugs on it, and I would not be being honest about that with the psychiatrists or the counselors. Um, there were many times that I kept so much hidden. So even looking back, it's like I can see how I was wrong in some of that, and some of the things that I did that, you know, kind of stopped me from getting help, or even just being so secretive and not knowing how to be honest. Not
Yeah.
just this whole inability to be honest about anything, that your reality starts to become so distorted, and then you lose your mind even more. So,
And your life becomes this manufactured story that you have
mhm.
a hard time even grasping what's real and what's not anymore, right?
I would say,
Yeah.
yeah, it
And it's
has
a
some
lot of work.
stories about that.
It ends up taking a lot of effort. It can be exhausting to try to hold up this narrative that you're telling everybody, trying to
Mhm.
keep the lies straight from what's real. And oh, yeah,
Yeah,
scary stuff.
yeah, yeah. And so then fast forward a little bit, did a lot of that, and then In my early 20s, I found out I was pregnant. It was not a planned pregnancy. I I had no I mean, at that time in my life, I had no plan for anything. It was 24/7, fly by the seat of your pants. Whatever happens the next day is what happens, where you're sleeping, who you're sleeping with, you know, no plan for anything. I wasn't working. I didn't even have a job at that time. My sole mission in life at that time was just how much can I drink and use so I don't have to feel what it's like to be in this body right now and this
Yeah.
mind. Um,
Yeah.
and so the day that I found out I was pregnant, I quit everything and I was terrified. I didn't even know if I could be a mom or if I should keep the baby. And it was actually my boyfriend at the time who convinced me, who was like, yeah, I think you would be a great mom. And so I went to the doctors, got the prenatal vitamins, and got a job at Burger King.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah. And little by little, even though I was pregnant and in a extremely toxic relationship with that person who was not sober as well and also was not working, I could feel myself start to feel better because I didn't have all that junk in my body anymore.
Yeah.
And I was working. I had a roof over my head that, I wasn't sleeping on someone's couch. So my life actually was starting to get better. My mom got me a really good job at Theta Care at Home. I was in the billing department. I mean, it's just, it was pretty much 180 is like I have nowhere to live and now I'm pregnant and I have a job and a roof
Yeah.
over
Yeah.
my head.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's incredible.
And yeah, so for the first 3 years of my son's life, I was sober and doing fairly well. It was a big struggle because I did end up becoming a single mom, pretty quickly after I became pregnant. But I will say that both of my parents, I could never have done that without both of my parents, my dad and my mom. And also my sister, my middle sister, both came along. She was pregnant at the same time as well. So I had a lot of people come alongside of me to care for me and love me. My coworkers threw me a baby shower. I didn't have, any of the baby supplies that you need when you have a baby. So I definitely can look back at that time in my life and see how loved I was and how cared for I was. But there was this part of me still that had all that stuff that I hadn't worked through. So I often didn't feel worthy of receiving that. So it
Yeah.
was difficult even to be helped and cared for too,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
those things, even though I was sober and I was carrying a child of my own, those things are still inside of me that I hadn't worked out, I hadn't talked out, I hadn't, I didn't even state had happened to me. Um, and so eventually those things began to creep back up in my life. And I began to have a lot of anxiety. And my friends went out for New Year's Eve one night and I went with them. I got a sitter for my son. And I hadn't drank in 3 years and it was a pretty bad night. Um, yeah, it was like no time had passed at all. And it was like I was right back to where I was the day that I quit. Um, the I could drink as much as I used to, and that affliction was just like right back there, that
Wow.
craving, that it's like that it drives you in a way that everything else in your life that used to matter and that you love just slowly fades in the background and it begins to be like the driving force in your life because it can have that hold over you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's brutal. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah, it was a lot. And so my son was about 4 at this time, and things were beginning to get really rough for us. I couldn't hold a job. I couldn't keep a roof over our head. Um, I had married a man that I barely knew, was married for 7 months. Um, it just the things that I look back, the decision making that I had, it was nothing thought through. Um, yeah, and so I had a moment where I was sitting in my apartment and I was trying to help. My son was in kindergarten at that time, and I was trying to help him with like simple, very, very simple homework. And my brain couldn't even, I couldn't function. I couldn't help him with simple kindergarten homework. And I had a moment of clarity where God spoke to me and told me, stop dragging your son through the mud with you. If you can't if you can't get this together, stop dragging him through the mud with you. Um, and so I think it was maybe a few days later, I called my mom and I told her that I couldn't do this anymore. This was, this is shared super big picture because I had already been to like another treatment before this, and was already starting to drink and use heavily again, unfortunately. Um, and that became another driving force, the guilt and shame that I had from having my son with me for that last year where it got really bad, where I know I wasn't caring for him. And unfortunately, he experienced trauma as well, as a result, as a direct result of my drinking and using and the people that I had surrounded at that time in my life. Um, so yeah, so I called my mom and I said, I can't do this. Can you take Josh so I can get some help? But even looking back at that, it's just again like fly by the seat of my pants. I had no plan. I hadn't talked to anybody about how I was going to get this help, where I was going to go for this help. I was winging it so much that it's no wonder I tanked all the time and nosedived. Um,
Yeah.
so after my son went with my mom, that's when it got really, really bad for me because I felt like I had no reason to live. The apartment that I was living in, I stayed in until they shut the lights out. And there was an eviction notice on the door, and I didn't have anywhere to go. So I would sleep in parks. I would sleep on people's couches. Um, and eventually I became homeless for probably about 2.5 years. I was living on the streets. I was completely out of my mind. I was gone. Um, was just like a shell. Um, yeah, I'm sure there were things that, I did and that occurred to me that I still may not totally remember because it was such a fog. Um, you know, when you're literally every day, day in, day out, drinking and drugging. I think a few times maybe the police would pick me up and I would go and be in a mental hospital for a while. I had no contact with my parents, my son, anyone in my family. And to my family's credit, again, when I would call for money, or to be bailed out of situations. And finally, my dad and my mom both agreed that we're not bailing Danny out anymore. Like this ends. Like it was really. I remember looking back and I would get so angry with them and they would hang up on me. And I'd be like, how are you hanging up on your daughter? You know? and the
Yeah.
guilt that I would try to, give them for deserting me when, I was in this mess and I had a lot of responsibility to own for being where I was. And so eventually I was living in Kakana on some guy's couch, and somebody called the police because I had broken and entered somebody's apartment intoxicated. And I don't even remember it, but I had scratches and things on my body and evidence on my body that I had broken into this person's apartment. And the police knocked on the door and they were like, "Are you Danielle Lewis?" And I'm like, "Yes." And they're like, "Okay, well, we believe that you have done this." And I had warrants out for my arrest. And again, this is super big picture. This time that I had spent on the streets, I was committing crime, shoplifting, yeah, just a lot of attempt to obtain controlled substances by fraud, going to the hospital and giving a fake name to try to get drugs or medication. Yeah, and the police officer actually was someone that I knew. It was someone that I grew up with. Um,
Wow.
and yeah, looking back, I know that was God. I know that
Yeah.
was God. Um, because I really just had forgotten who I was. Um, and it had been so long since somebody had looked at me like a human being, like that I mattered, that I wasn't just this animal, trying to survive. And he said, "Danny, do you remember me?" And I said, "Yeah, I remember you." And I'll never forget when he got me into the police car, he's looking in the rearview mirror and I'm sitting in the back. And it was the first time somebody said to me, "What happened to you?" Not what's wrong with you. I feel like for so
Oh,
much,
wow.
yeah, it was what happened to you. Because you
Nice.
used to be this girl that I knew that was full of life and, you know, just had a lot of joy. And
Yeah.
yeah, so it was this moment where I felt like kind of like a melting, and I started to recall, oh, I have a family. I have, his mom worked with my dad, so I started thinking about my dad and then started thinking about my mom, started thinking about my son. And these are all people that I had not thought about in years because I just completely pushed it out of my mind. Um, and when he brought me to Outagamie County Jail, um, he said, "I believe you're going to do well, and I really want to see you get better." And it was like this word of encouragement that I, for so long in that time of my life, nobody had, spoken a kind word to me. It was quite the opposite, in fact, which there are definitely times I deserved. But yeah, so that night in the jail cell, I was pretty sick. Um, I felt very scared. I felt very alone. Um, and I began to weep, and I fell down on my knees. And I just said to God that I can't do this anymore. I can't live my life like this anymore. And I remember feeling like somebody put a warm blanket around my shoulders, and even like looking behind me because it was just surreal. It felt like somebody was in there with me and I was in there by myself. Um, and that was really the first moment of surrender for me after fighting for a long time. I mean,
Yeah.
really fighting, fighting pretty
Hey.
hard. Um, yeah, and the craving for alcohol and drugs was taken from me that night. I have not drank or done drugs since then, since 2009. So,
Wow.
yeah, yeah,
Praise
it
the
was
Lord.
yeah, praise the
It's
Lord.
a miracle. Yeah, that's amazing.
It's a
Good
miracle.
work too. I know there's a
It's
lot
a
of work
miracle.
that goes into that too, though. So
Yeah, yes,
like
yeah,
cravings and stuff all aside, but still there's a lot of discipline to live a life of sobriety. So
yeah. Yeah.
Wow, what a story. Wow, I never heard the police officer. Like, and
Yeah.
great, like, wow, what a way to describe that too, of just somebody seeing you as a human again was
Mhm.
in a like a word of encouragement can go a long way. Wow.
Yeah. It's like somebody
That's
speaking
good.
my language.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, wow, that's really inspiring.
Yeah. So that began a very long journey for me. I was facing 6 years in prison. And so my dad actually talked to the DA. I was in Outagamie County Jail for 9 months while I waited my sentence. And again, the day that I was sentenced, I surrendered and I said to God, whatever happens, just take care of me and help me stay sober. And at that time, I had someone from the outside um, help me start to do some step work and gave me some readings to do while I was in jail. They did have meetings that I could attend to while I was there as well,
So
which really
step
helped.
work meaning like the 12-step program?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Yes. Definitely helped save my life.
Yeah,
Definitely
nice.
helped me I shouldn't say save my life, helped me build a better life. I do definitely
Oh,
feel it was God who saved my life, but the 12 steps helped me live my life continuously sober and experience a much better life. So,
yeah, great.
yeah. Yeah, so um yeah, so the day that I was going to be sentenced for they were going to sentence me for 6 years, the judge had a moment where he stopped and he looked at me and he's like, "I'm gonna do something I don't usually do." And he said, "You've been in my courtroom a few times." I mean, I'd
Yeah,
seen this judge, I don't even know how many times I'd been in and out of his courtroom. And he said, "I'm gonna give you one last try, one last attempt to get and stay sober and turn your life around." um, with the clause of he did put me on probation for 6 years and did say that if I, messed up at all, there wasn't even going to be another hearing. It was just going to be, yeah, you're just
right
going
to the
straight there.
clinker.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So much as a seatbelt violation, right? Yeah,
much. Yeah, yeah. Dirty way, anything. So,
right.
yeah, my dad found a place called the Butterfly House, and it was a living sober facility, so it was a little different than treatment, which I think really helped me because I really didn't know how to live sober. I didn't know it'd been so long since I'd really worked a job. And there's just a lot of like emotions, and they always talk about in recovery how when you get sober, the great thing is that you get to get your feelings back. And, the hard thing is that you get your feelings back.
Oh, yeah. Double-edged
Yeah.
sword there, huh? Yeah, holy cow.
Yeah. So there was just a lot to sort through, and there was a lot of things for me to learn to become a responsible adult. I didn't have a vehicle, I didn't have a license, I didn't have any money saved up, obviously. And I'm in my 30s at this point of my journey. I was 33. So there was just a lot that um I didn't know how to live. So going to the sober living facility really taught me the skills that I needed, even just to be disciplined about getting up on time for work, and going to work every day. And then you had to pay money to live there. So I hadn't paid money to live somewhere, God knows how long.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, so all of that and learning how to live sober and stay sober. And then a step further of learning how to be of service to other people, not just in my community, but at the house I was living at. Even simple things like doing chores and working together with the other girls that lived there. But these were all skills that I definitely did not have at that time in my life, and I'm so so grateful for the lady, shout out to Doreen, who ran the
yeah,
house, who helped me learn those. And I know she saw that I may have needed a little extra discipline. So,
yeah.
A little bit, yeah. So she was a little extra hard on me. Um, but I look back at that and I thank God for that. I thank God for that. And there was definitely a method to her madness sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah, like one little story is I remember coming home from work one day and I hadn't put my clothes away properly and they were like, just kind of everywhere and she had taken the drawers out of the dresser and like dumped all of my clothes out on the floor and I was like, "What? Why'd you
Yeah.
do this?"
It's boot camp. I literally have stories like that in my drill instructors, Danny. Yeah. Oh,
But you
yeah.
have to handle it well, it's like, okay, and
Yeah. What do you
had to
do? It's like you clean
yeah.
up your mess or you're out, right?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
the alternative was way worse. It's like,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
I don't wanna go back to that, and I definitely don't wanna go to prison, so,
Right.
I think I'll fold my clothes nicely and put them away neatly.
Yep. And
Socks with
thank
the sock.
Donna. Yeah.
Yeah, so just little things like that that might seem so silly to someone else, eating 3 meals a day, learning how to cook, um learning how to meal prep, learning how to plan things, like plan your week. We'd have weekly planning meetings at this house, and these were all skills that I desperately needed, but hadn't been taught at that point in my life yet. Um,
Yeah.
and I'm sure I've had these examples growing up, but again, when you're going through things and you can't make sense of things, and then you get an unhealthy coping
Yeah.
habit that becomes
Right.
so habitual, it's like in one ear out the other. Um,
Right. But it
yeah,
makes, and you kind of, I love it. I love the turnaround because you even said earlier how like the life of addiction was a life of just like, you're just going with the flow. You never know
mm,
what the next day is going to bring. And there's the deception of that, like, we believe that's going to bring this freedom, right? This
mm,
carefreeness that we all do want, right? And but so it makes sense, like the skills you would need to have like a structured life, you just never learned.
no,
And it was not part of your plan for happiness.
definitely
So
not.
you didn't feel like you needed it. And now it's like you're learning this whole other side of things where it's like, oh, the structure, there's certain amount of structure is what actually
Mhm.
helps us have safe freedom and not
Absolutely.
homeless and
Yeah,
homeless,
eating out of a
scared and
dumpster.
eating, yeah, eating out of a
Meal
dumpster
planning
freedom.
equals not eating out of a dumpster.
Meal, meal prep. No one's ever meal prepped dumpster dive.
Probably not, no.
Pro- Probably not. Yeah. Yeah. Oh
Um
man.
Yeah, so that was an incredible experience for me, and I learned so much, and I definitely began to see my life get better. It was a place called St. Croix Falls that the house was in, and so my sponsor at the time actually offered to let me live with her and her husband
Wow.
um, for an extended amount of time after I graduated the program, just to give me like an extra footing, because I was going to be facing a lot when I moved back to Appleton. I had a son that I was disconnected, very disconnected from my family. I had a youngest brother getting married when I was going to be moving back, and I didn't know his wife. I'd never met her. So, yeah, so there was just a lot I was going to have to be facing. So they really felt like it would help me to just, get a little more grounding and foot under me, um, living a pretty structured life without a lot of like distractions and emotional things going on. And so I eventually did move back to Appleton. And that was really difficult because there were so many things that I hadn't been facing that now all of a sudden I was going to have to face. And so that kind of brought up the aspect of not really dealing with the mental and emotional health of the aspect that, we need the all four areas to be in alignment, to live a full and happy life. And so
Yeah.
that, there were quite a few years where I was still really struggling, even though I wasn't drinking or doing drugs. There were still quite a few years where I was really struggling mentally and emotionally. And I still had pretty low self-esteem. Um, and so, yeah, when I moved back, and saw my son again, and just all of those feelings bubbling up in me, my mind didn't really know how to process a lot of that. I did end up going to therapy, but again, when I went to therapy, they often suggested seeing, a doctor or psychiatrist in addition with the therapy, because I was starting to experience some depression again, anxiety, racing thoughts, big emotions, a lot of big emotions, and not always handling things well. Um, and so that kind of started this journey still with being medicated, and just it wasn't helping anything that was going on in my head or my heart. It was again just kind of like numbing what was
Yeah.
still bubbling under the surface of me.
Yeah.
Um, and so I did eventually find a really good counselor who did some therapy, some talk therapy, and a therapy called EMDR that did help me. And during that process, I do believe that even though while I was medicated, it started to begin this journey of like, I don't know if I really want to be on all of this medication. I don't know if this is really helping. And so again, I had a morning where I woke up and God spoke to me, and he just asked me a question. He just said, "Are you even happy on all this stuff? Do you think this is helping?" And I just answered. I was
Wow.
like, "No, I don't think it is, and I think I want to try and get off of this." But again, I didn't go about it and just like fly by the seat of my pants. I did come up with a plan. I called a lady in recovery who had some experience with this stuff. And so she gave me like a really good plan to call the psychiatrist and just be open to expressing to the psychiatrist that I wanted to get off the medication, but I wanted to do it in a safe way. I didn't want to
Yeah.
just
Right.
take myself off all these medications that I was on, um,
Right.
because I had done that kind of stuff in my past before, and it doesn't end well. Especially some of the medications that I was on, you do need to be weaned off of
Like
them.
weaned off. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I began the process to be weaned off of all of those medications in a safe way. Um, and that was 7 years ago now. So I thank God for that again, that I don't have to take medication to
Wow.
uh, handle life rather. And
Yeah.
again, I will preface this is just my story. And
Right.
when I share my story in recovery, I always preface that this is my experience and I
Yep.
have no opinion on somebody taking medication or not taking medication. I've just found that for me, it didn't work.
Right.
It wasn't making anything better. And in fact, in some cases, it was making it worse. And it was just this grayness covering what was still kind of lying underneath the surface. So yeah, yeah,
So 7 years without like mental health meds and emotional meds.
yeah. And
Wow.
this is a person that has been medicated since I was probably about 13, 14. So yeah,
Wow.
that
That's, yeah. Okay.
yeah,
Most of your
yeah. The
life.
psychiatrist even said that, the probability of me being able to be medication free were not likely. She did explain to me that with some of the diagnoses that I had, it was just not probable that I would be a, medication free patient. Um, but she said, to her, like, I owe her a lot. To her credit, she did do it in a safe way. And it was with stipulations. I did have to go back we did make an agreement that I would continue to check in with her for 2 years. And I did make an agreement with her to go see a counselor and continue to go to counseling. And I kept that agreement, and I kept that agreement. Every time I'd go back to see her every 6 months. And every 6 months that I would go back to see her, it was pure joy.
Incredible. Yeah. What progress, huh?
Yes, yes. And
Huh.
to see her reaction to the fact that I was doing even better in life that I had been when I was medicated,
Yeah.
and how much life and joy that I had, it was like night and day. So I know I was able to restore some faith that, maybe not every patient needs to be heavily medicated, that, there are safe ways we can do this, and things we, can put in place to make sure this patient is going to be safe through this process. Um, and I felt completely well cared for during that time. And I even had a sponsor that had that sat me down and was like, I would just remain open to, if it did ever come to it, that you might have to go back on it. And I did that. Like, yeah, okay, I can stay open to that, because I realized that, you know, in recovery, we talk a lot about control, or trying to control outcomes. Um, and so just being willing to be in that, that middle spot of being open to, yeah, like, just for today, I'm not going to be medicated. It could change tomorrow, but just for today,
Yeah.
man, I
Okay.
don't have to take that anymore.
You're right. But I know
Uh,
enough. I know enough to not say I'll never be medicated again.
right, right, right.
But
Because there
today,
are, yes, and I can definitely see the benefits of times where, I know I was out of my mind, and I was, a harm to myself and possibly others, where, being medicated, probably did save my life. I can be the first person to admit that, um, to help slow my brain down from some of the things that I was experiencing. But long term, for
yeah,
me, it was
more
not.
detrimental. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, so that began, that part of my story and that part of my journey. And yeah, I feel pretty darn grateful about that one too.
Yeah, that's incredible. So then that's the peak of your mental health journey then?
No, definitely
No?
not.
Okay, well, how did it get better than that?
So eventually I found this church called Music of Life Church. Um,
Oh.
and that's a pretty cool story, how all of that happened. Um, but I found it, and I took the restoration course, and that has been
Well,
the
real quick,
thing.
what was the
Oh,
can you mind just real
yeah,
quick, I'd love to know, like, what was the connection? You don't have to go in too much detail, but
yeah,
what was the connection between the path you were on and how'd you find Music Life Church?
yeah, yeah. So, I had always believed in God. I had always wanted to have a deeper relationship with God and understand God better. And I felt like I got a lot of that in recovery rooms. I
Yeah.
felt like I got a lot of that in nature. And in fact, it was when I was in nature where God spoke to me again, and told me to find a church community.
Oh,
And I
cool.
still think it's, not odd. It's God that he said community. He didn't say a church. He said find a church community. And so that began a 2-year journey of trying to find a church community. And so
Okay.
I went church hopping instead of bar hopping. I went church.
Nice. Yeah. I love that.
Oh, so cheesy. Um, yeah, so I was about to give up on this journey. I had tried another church that just wasn't, I didn't feel it felt invasive. And I didn't understand why they had these big cameras and during worship time it was like it just felt so invasive. I was like, I don't know, and they didn't explain things. And so I just didn't understand, what was happening
Yeah.
and why that was happening. And so I was about to give up. And again, God told me to call this guy that I know, Simon, or, or not, sorry, not Simon, Ian, who knows
Yeah.
Simon. I had never
Right.
met
Yeah.
Simon at that time yet. So God spoke to me, said, pick up the phone, call Ian. I called Ian. I'm like bawling my eyes out. And I'm like, I give up. And he's like, Ian is like so even keeled. And he's just like super calm, super collected. And he started asking me questions like, what are you looking for in a church? Do you want a denomination? Do you want this? Do you want that? And he just started asking me questions. And it started to like kind of just, help level me out, think a little, more clearly, not so emotional.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then he said, hey, this guy that I work with, Simon, he's a pastor at a church called Music of Life Church. And he's like, they meet at Copper Rock on Sunday nights at 6 p.m. And I said, okay. And he said, I really trust Simon. He's a really good guy. And all of my experiences that I've known Ian, it's always been safe. It's always been trustworthy. Um, and so I'm like, all right, well, if this guy trusts Simon, whoever this Simon is, I'm going to give it one last go. And so I did. It was like Sunday morning that I had that phone call with him. And then I went that same night. It was Sunday night.
Wow.
I went that same night. I walked in all by myself, which that really wasn't that big of a deal for me because I'd walked into, recovery rooms many times by myself. But I tell you what, I walked into this place and as a feelings person, you could feel the difference from the second you walked in to this room.
Yeah.
And Patty greeted me, and the way she greeted me, it felt so safe. It felt so safe. And I just felt like I took this deep breath. And I'm looking around the room and, people are drinking coffee and having snacks and laughing. And what I noticed was that everybody really seemed like they knew each other and not just like fake note, like, oh, we're at church. Again, once I got understanding of my feelings gift, it made so much sense. It's like I am very aware of certain things and
Yeah.
getting an understanding to that and naming that, it is so settling to know that like that's not my imagination. I'm not crazy. I'm not a crazy person. What I was feeling was true. It was what happens, when there is fellowship and community and when people have understanding of why church happens and how to go about it in a right way, and what happens when people, are synced up with a knowing of truth, that's what happens. That's the experience you get. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's pretty
Wow.
incredible. And, I sat down and Patty sat down next to me in this Copper Rock hall, and Simon got up and gave a sermon, and I'll never forget this too. He was quoting a song from Simon and Garfunkel.
Oh,
And I
yeah.
loved the song. Yeah, Bridge Over Troubled Waters, and he was sharing his story, and I just felt like he was speaking right to me. I felt like he was
Yeah.
speaking right to me. And I think something too about like his energy being a little more like slow and kind of very
Yeah.
small
Yeah.
for me. And this girl, it's like settled me. And I
Yeah.
felt like I could just sit and sink into my seat and really listen, and I could hear him.
Yeah.
And I've been going ever since.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad I asked that question. That's such a great story. It makes me feel so great about our community. I love it is a community. That's what you experience, and it's no wonder it stood out. So then, what was this thing you called restoration? What was that all about,
Oh,
huh?
yes, yes. So, Music of Life Church Kimberly, the sister church, it's where they like build leaders. They have a program called Restoration, and it's 11 lessons. Um, and what was really cool was, especially as a person who has gone through the 12 steps, seeing the correlation of some of the lessons, but also some of the missing pieces that I didn't get in recovery, like understanding my uniqueness and understanding my gifts. It
Yeah.
put a name to so many experiences I've had, and I still get those revelations today. I'll get a memory pop up and it's like, oh, yep, that was my exhorter in misuse, or that was my exhorter like doing good.
Yeah.
And the same with my compassion. It's like I have both feeling gifts, and just getting understanding about that. And then the two coaches that I had were awesome too, Junko and Josiah. Um, the way that they listened to me share a story. I'd gone through counseling, I'd been through therapy, and even the difference the difference in like sharing in a large group. Um, it was you could again just feel the how intentional they were and how well they would hear a story. And so I just began to feel seen, heard, and understood in a way that made sense and that I could understand. And then getting a deeper understanding of who God is and that God wants to be understood. It was like, what? I thought this was supposed to be a mystery and we're just, like in recovery, we talk about like more will be revealed, which I mean, it always is. We don't know everything, but to just even get a beginning understanding of all of that, it fed my soul in a way that it made me hungry. It made me hungry for more. I just kept wanting to do more and more and more and keep growing in that, and
Yeah.
keep growing and learning about all of the things. Yeah, and so that ended up, I graduated restoration. I became a restoration coach. And then I read Modeling God, and I got to go through a Modeling God book club, which, you talk about getting your gifts, but then getting your spiritual R was like, I thought that was great, but getting
Yeah.
that was just like, what? And it gave me a plan, not just an understanding, but a plan of when I have these big feelings, what I can do and how I can, rehearse so that when I experience something that I'm not just all over the map, I'm not here or here. Um, I can identify at a principal level, what I'm experiencing in those moments and then rehearse for that and do that intentionally so that the next time something happens where somebody talks out of turn and I feel triggered, like that's a principle, respecting your teacher, that's teaching you. It's like I can use contrastive thinking. I can do this thing that I do with my ring here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Take a deep breath.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Oh, I
so all
remember
of
that
that.
book club. That was an
Oh,
amazing journey. The one that you were in, that was when I was still teaching all of them. And yeah, that was an incredible one. Yeah.
it
I was
was
glad you
it
were there.
was Yep.
Yeah.
I got my spiritual R.
Yeah.
Healing, grace, joyful play. Which I feel, even if people don't understand the full part of that, like just hearing it, when I tell it to people, they're like, oh yeah, that's totally, that's
And
totally
can
you.
you say them again?
Healing, embrace, joyful play.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, you got your spiritual, which is, it's the more specific version of your uniqueness.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we try to figure it is a journey we're on, and it's like the gifts God gave you, and how he formed your soul. And
Mm.
yeah, we see the evidence of that in your life. All right, Danny, this was incredible. I want to give you a question to land the plane here.
All
So,
right.
like, because restoration was a few years ago now, wasn't it?
Yep.
The book club was like over a year ago, wasn't it?
Yes, correct.
So, and you've been growing a ton and more involved in the church since then. So,
Hmm.
what are the hopes? What are the hopes for the future?
Oh, I love that question. Um, yeah, for me, I definitely have a few things that I would like to continue to grow in at church. I am on the worship team. Singing is a big passion of mine.
Uh,
I love singing. So continuing to grow it in being a worship leader, continuing to grow and being a leader just at church. I think sometimes when people come to church for the first time, they just kind of need someone to hang out with and get to know them and just be about them. So that's something that I continue to do and continue to grow in. And what's recently been put on my heart is becoming a deacon. So
Ooh. All
yeah,
right.
I
Well,
need
hey,
it.
what would you
So
call it what would you call it? Acts of service?
acts of service, yeah.
I mean,
And it's
that's like the
very similar
deacon is like the
to
pinnacle of that in the church, right?
yes, yes. And there are so many similarities to things in recovery. The person that shows up, opens the meeting up, gives the meeting
Yeah.
a topic, makes the coffee, cleans up the coffee, is responsible for the money. That's because they rent those spaces out in the church in those church basements. So there are a lot of similarities. I just feel like I get the deeper understanding there. And the community, like very we're pretty tight knit. So that's a good feeling to be known and to know others deeply.
That's wonderful answer. I can already see it happening. And wow, Danny, this went better than I expected. It really did. And I expected it to go really well because I know you have a great story. And what I didn't put together though is of course you'd be so good at telling it because you have so much experience
Mm,
imparting the wisdom you have onto others through the recovery programs and how you've helped people in that context as well. It's really encouraging. Your life is an inspiration and wow, I'm so glad you were on the show. So yeah, what I can't wait is for everybody to not only everybody experiences the energy you have when they meet you. But what I think gets lost on people sometimes is how much wisdom you have and how brilliant you are. And I'm
mm.
really looking forward to people seeing that shine through in this episode as well. So thank you for sharing your story and giving us some wisdom tonight. And wow, I can't wait. I can't wait for people to see this.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you, Dr. Joel. It's an
Yeah.
honor to be on your show. Thank you. Thank
Well,
you.
you're welcome. And all right, Danny. Thank you. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
What did I say? Thank you again, Danny, for being on this show. Just an incredible journey that she's been through, and I can only see it continuing to be incredible. So let's dig in a little bit. She talked a lot about her gifts and uniqueness being feelings gifts. I just want to start with a step back from that. The gifts listed in Romans chapter 12 in the Bible are what I refer to as the motivational spiritual gifts. These are gifts given to everybody from the womb. They essentially describe how you are motivated or what drives you. Now, we've learned that everybody has one that motivates them in why they do what they do, and then one that is really essentially how they do that. So when Dani talks about these gifts being feelings gifts, Dani is compassion exhorter. And why she does what she does is she wants to bear the pain of others. And how she does it is through being encouraging. So she feels what other people feel. And she also shares her feelings, especially of encouragement, with others. So she does feel a lot, and learning how to get a hold of that and channel it the right way so that it's a benefit to the others is one of the great things that she's learned over the years, and especially in her journey through restoration at Music of Life Church and with this community that God has brought her to. If you want more understanding about the motivational spiritual gifts, check out the restoration process at musicoflifechurch.com. It's a free process that she talked about herself, 11 lessons. And very early on, you learn about your uniqueness. The next thing I wanted to talk about is addiction. Simply put, addiction is when a behavior is equated to more is better. So Dani and I talked about this as it related to her drinking and how she felt this warmth and this calmness over her when she was just a little girl. And then as she kept drinking to get that same feeling, it took more for her to experience that same feeling. That's essentially what it looks like in every addiction, is more is better. And essentially that's why you could say to somebody who has an addiction in drugs or alcohol, how many drinks is enough? How many, drugs, like how much cocaine or whatever is enough? And the answer is more, right? There's not an enough. It's always when's the next fix. So the thing is, you can't do a don't, right? For instance, if you wanted me to drive somewhere, let's say to my church or to visit your church, let's say, and you gave me directions and I gave you the challenge. All right, give me directions to your church by only telling me what not to do. I'd never get there, would I? You can't do a don't. So with that said, so many of the coping mechanisms for getting over an addiction are don't do's. Don't do this. I'm going to stop drinking. I'm going to stop doing drugs. The way the brain works, though, is you can't do a don't. And the way addiction works is you have to replace it, essentially, with a different addiction. Now, you might want to just call that a habit. A habit is essentially an addiction. We have the negative connotation to the word addiction because it's tied to drugs and alcohol a lot, or to things that are detrimental to our health, and habits that are more positive for our health and in our brain. So you can use those two separate words, but they essentially mean the same thing. The thing is, the way God created us, the way our brains work, is our plan for happiness is an addiction. Where you are wired for your happiness is an addiction. And there's only four, because there's four different thought processes. I've covered this on the show before too. There's only four ways that we can really be addicted to our happiness or wired for our happiness. The first is the destructive way, or the destructive thought process. A destructive plan for happiness is I'm happy when others are not, or when others are in harm, or when others are hurt. That's the blow other people's candles out makes you feel better plan for happiness. Then there's the animal thought process or animal plan for happiness, which this is just to avoid pain. And this is really the key to like the types of addiction that Dani dealt with is really in this thought process. And if you think about what her story was, it was very much, I'm drinking and then using in order to not feel these things, right? In order to avoid the tension or the pain of these big feelings I have. The third way that you can be wired for happiness or addicted to happiness is the human thought process or the human plan for happiness, which is just achievement. This is achievement. The more I achieve, the better. It's the no pain, no gain strategy. It's the I'm going to get to the top of the mountain. The problem is we end up wearing ourselves out because eventually there's only so many mountaintops that you can get to, and you're just going to end up falling back down. And inevitably, what you end up doing is falling into the animal thought process or the animal plan for happiness, and you start avoiding the pain, and it just gets worse and worse. So the fourth is the godly or the truth plan for happiness. And this is really about grace. This is really about giving up control. So we gain control through restoration, through learning to bear our own burdens so that we can ultimately give up control. You can't give something you don't have. So we need to first get in control, which a lot of Dani's story was proof of that. The 12-step program was one of the ways that she learned to gain control of her life, but she still had to submit and surrender and give up control to God. We can literally be addicted to grace. We can be addicted to God's divine influence upon the heart and its reflection in life. In other words, we can be addicted to God flowing through us. And when we are, that is when we're wired to that thought process for happiness. So if you're dealing with an addiction, you can figure out which of those different thought processes that it's in line with. And when you discuss or determine what it is you want to replace it with, what's a different habit you want to replace it with, you can determine which thought process of a habit you want to replace it with. And maybe if you're dealing with something like the animal thought process, the next best step is just to get to the human thought process level. Like if I have an addiction of like overeating and stuff, maybe I want to replace that with something healthy, an achievement, going to the gym or going for a walk. That's the way that works. That's the way our brain works. We don't just stop doing something. We have to have something to focus on, something to do. I had a great interaction with one of my coaches from the gym a couple weeks ago. I was talking to him about the restoration process that Music of Life Church teaches and offers to people. And one of the things that I know that separates us from therapy and counselors and all this stuff is all of our restoration coaches have been through restoration themselves. It's one of the requirements. So they've all been there and they've all been through it. And now they're helping other people. And really the way I describe restoration is it isn't therapy. It isn't counseling. It's us giving you a set of tools to use so that you can use them in the midst of the noise of the world to be able to maintain your ability to think clearly. While everything around you is screaming, you have the ability to stay calm. So we give you tools to use. We give you a tool belt is the best way to think of it. So when I was describing this to this coach, which again, he's a coach in a gym for a living, he helps people become physically more fit. And of course, the mental and emotional thought processes have something to do with that as well. There's a lot of mental grit and emotional grit that goes into it, but primarily it's this physical fitness. But a lot of the mindset is similar. So he kind of has this grasp of like what it takes to coach and what it takes to help people. And one of the questions he had for me is, how do they get paid? And I said, well, they don't. They're all volunteers. They've all been helped so much that they just want to help other people now. So they volunteered to be coaches. And his response was, wow, you just don't see that. And in the way of like, what an amazing thing that your church is experiencing. What an amazing quality of these coaches that you have from somebody who knows what it takes to coach. He said this of these people at Music Life Church. It is so rare. I thought it was quite the affirmation of the coaches at Music of Life Church. The last thing I want to share is my really just encouragement of this police officer Dani had that experience with. That kind of was the catalyst to her life changing. And it again, I just want to emphasize, like I did in the episode, one word of encouragement or one act of compassion could make the difference in somebody's life. You may never even know it, but a word of encouragement to somebody could change their life forever. An act of compassion could be just what they need to make that turn for the better. And I wanted to read this verse for y'all. I just was reminded of this when Dani was sharing, and I thought she would enjoy this too. Psalm 139:14 says this: I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are thy works, and that my soul knoweth right well. Praise the Lord. We are all fearfully and wonderfully made. Now, finally, if you need help with any of the addictions like alcohol or drugs or anything like that, and you're looking for a place to start getting some help, go ahead. I encourage you. And I know Dani shared this with me at the end when we were chatting, when we weren't recording anymore. If you need help, find a recovery community. And she also wanted you to know, if you don't know where to start, you can reach out to her. So yeah, you can find Dani on Facebook, and yeah, just reach out to her and she will give you the right steps to start this journey for yourself. But that's it for today on Unlocked. I'm Dr. Joel Swakowski. Again, you can find Dani on Facebook. You can go and find the restoration process at musicoflifechurch.com. Check out those resources. Reach out to Dani. Thank you for listening. Keep seeking truth and keep living it out. We'll see you next time.